Hey, what's up everyone? Danny Lightning here with another video. So we're going to check out the Sony ZV-1 camera. We're going to go through all of the in-camera settings to set this thing up for use as a webcam. All right, we're also going to go into the picture profiles and I'm going to show you how to make this thing look more natural. The stock Sony colors are terrible, so I'm going to show you how to make the camera go from looking way too contrasty, way too much dynamic range and stuff like that, to looking very natural like this right here. So first we're going to go into all the in-camera settings to show you how to set it up as a webcam, and then we're going to go into the picture profile settings when we're done with that, and I'm going to show you how to change it from a mess like you just saw there to something that looks a little more like this. Now if you're using it for a webcam or streaming, you're probably not going to be doing a bunch of video processing, so you need to make sure the camera looks good as is without a bunch of processing. So that's what we're going to do in the picture profiles. Before we get into all this stuff, real quick, lighting is very important. Good lighting is almost more important than your camera. Now as far as lighting goes, you want to find yourself a really nice high quality key light. Nice soft diffused light with a high CRI rating. All right, you want to find a CRI of 95 plus, which means the colors are going to look great. If you go much below like 90 on the CRI, the color is going to look drab and dull and boring, and you're just not going to have those beautiful colors that really pop out. So nice soft diffused light with a CRI rating of 95 plus is really what you want for the lighting. A good light can make a bad camera look so much better, but a good light can make a great camera look amazing. So let's go get into those camera settings now. All right, so we're going to go into the menu settings. The first one is mainly the photography settings, but we're still going to go through this anyway. So first off, JPEG image size. All right, 17 large 17M. That's where you want it. Aspect ratio, make sure you set that to 16.9. That's very important. Next menu, this is how I have it set up. This is how I would suggest setting this as well. Long exposure on, high ISO NR normal, and color space sRGB. Next setting, manual exposure. Okay, you want to make sure you're set to manual so you can really dial in the settings the way you want. Anything on this, I don't think I would mess with it too much. Leave all these as is. This menu, don't mess with this for now. Focus mode, definitely keep it on continuous autofocus. And focus area, I like to have that set to wide. So the face eye autofocus set, you definitely want to turn that to on and set that to human. It's already set up that way, so you don't have to change it. Pre-autofocus on. The rest of the settings, don't mess with them. Leave them as is. Next, display content autofocus area, turn that on. Don't change anything else here, okay? ISO, set that to wherever you need it. If you're familiar with cameras, all right, you already know how that works. ND filter, make sure that's turned off. Metering mode, make sure that stays on multi, and face priority in multi, make sure that is turned on. That's very important for this camera. All right, all this, don't touch it, leave that as is. We don't even have a flash on this camera anyway, so we don't need to mess with that. White balance, all right, I set the white balance according to my room. You might want to put it on auto, I'm not sure, but that's up to you. All right, picture effect turned off. Now you see picture profile. You see we're on picture profile number 4. We will come back to that. We will come back to the picture profiles and show you how to make it look nice instead of ugly in just a minute. Soft skin effect, I would turn that off. All right, that's supposed to like soften your skin and get rid of wrinkles and blemishes and stuff. But in my opinion, that looks really terrible. You can play with that and see if you like it on or off, but I definitely have it off. On this thing, don't mess with anything. Leave everything as is on this screen. On this screen, product showcase, I always set that to off. That's set to on. It does some pretty cool stuff, but it won't focus on your eye the way it does. You want this camera to focus on your eye. and you definitely want that to be on face priority down there. All right, so now we're going to get into the setting 2, which is more of the video settings. All right, so exposure mode, we're on manual exposure. File format XAVCS HD. That's going to be the one that gives you 1080p, and I got it set to 24 frames per second, 50M. You can do 24, 30, or 60. Most film has always been done in 24, so I set mine to 24. I think that looks really nice. I think that's mainly for the recording though, and not so much as the webcam. HFR settings, leave that alone. Quality, make sure you set the quality to extra fine. Next, manual image size, I always keep that on the large setting, which is the 17M. Autofocus drive speed fast, autofocus tracking sensitivity responsive. Auto slow shutter, I just go ahead and leave that on. Next setting, let's see what's on here that needs changed. There's nothing on here that you really need to change except for maybe the steady shot. I would turn steady shot to off because you're probably using this on a tripod or something. If it's being used for a webcam, you're not going to be shaking the camera around, and if you get the wrong steady shot settings, it'll crop the photo down and you won't have that nice wide view of your room. So I always turn all the steady shot stuff to the off settings. All right, next we have all this stuff. I don't change any of this, just leave this as is. All right, so let's move on to the next one. This guy right here, shutter type auto, steady shot off. I don't know why there's two steady shot settings, but I turn them both to off. Like I said, if you don't, it might crop your image in and you have a much narrower field of view instead of that nice wide shot. All right, next. Zoom settings, optical zoom only. You can actually change that one if you want. A lot of people like the clear image zoom, okay? Clear image is nice, or optical zoom only. Digital zoom generally looks like poo-poo, so yeah, go with either optical or clear image. All right, I'm gonna go and change it to clear image, which is actually a little bit better. Zoom speed, I like to keep that on normal. Let's see, zebra settings, those are pretty cool. You might want to turn those on. They help you figure out if you've got hot spots or any of the whites are blown out or anything like that. I'll show you the zebra settings really quick. All right, I turn it on and I put the level to 95. It'll show you these little lines on the camera that let you know when spots are blown out or the highlights are blown out or whatever you want to say. So that's actually very handy. You don't need to turn that on. Some people love that, some people hate that, but I like to have the zebra settings on. All right. The rest of the stuff I leave set as is on this menu. So let's go over to menu 8. I leave everything in here set as is. I didn't change anything here. Number 9, audio signals on all. You want to make sure you leave that as is. Let's go over to the next set of menus. All right, right here, this is all mainly like your Wi-Fi and your network stuff. You don't really need to mess with that for using it as a webcam unless you're doing some weird, interesting stuff with it. I don't use any of that. All right, I don't use any of that at all. Wi-Fi settings, you know, it's got Wi-Fi, it's got this, it's got that. Unless you're like hooking different things up to your camera wirelessly, don't mess with any of these. That's not really what this video is about. Playback, don't mess with this. On here, leave all these settings stock. On this menu, I don't think you need to mess with anything on here. This menu, just leave that as is. Now we're going to get into the settings menu, and there's definitely some things you're going to need to change here. All right. On this menu, you can just go ahead and leave everything as is. Menu number 2, power off with monitor, you can just leave that as power off. Auto power off temperature, that needs to be changed, guys. You need to come down here and you need to change it from standard to high. That's actually very important. If the camera starts to get a little warm, sometimes it'll just shut off on you. And if you change it to high, that doesn't happen. So you definitely want to change that to high if you're going to be using this camera for long periods of time. Then you'll hit OK. There we go. Everything else on this menu can just leave it as is. Okay, so now we're going to need to go into the HDMI settings, and this is actually very important. So HDMI, I've got it set to 1080p and 60 frames per second. HDMI info display, you need to turn that off. If you don't turn that off, you're going to have all the little like display stuff showing up on your screen as a webcam. Like you make sure you turn that off. That's very important. So this is exactly how I would set that resolution. You can either do 1080p or you can put that up to 4K if you want. I changed that to 60p. All right, this HDMI display info off. Everything else you can just leave on. You don't have to mess with it. Everything else on this menu, just leave it as is. Number 4. Nothing else on here that we need to mess with. Number 5. Let's see. Nothing on this menu that we need to mess with. And number 6, you can reset the entire camera back to bone stock if you've messed up your settings with this right here. All right, so I think those are the main settings right now. So all we got to do right now is go into the picture profile mode and change the picture profile to make everything look beautiful. Let me double check to make sure I didn't miss anything real quick. Okay, one last thing on setup menu number 3 where it says USB power supply, make sure that's turned on, and you don't need a dummy battery. If that's turned on, you can just put your battery into the camera, and then you can plug the USB charging cable into the camera and it will charge the cable. It'll power the camera from the USB cable. That way you have the battery is never going to die on you when you're doing your recording or your streaming or whatever. So that one is very important. I believe that comes on stock when you get the camera. I don't think you have to change that, but make sure that's turned on, guys. Make sure that's turned on. So now let's go look at the picture profile modes. And this is very important for making it look really nice because, like I said, the stock Sony colors, not so great, but picture profile modes can make this look beautiful. Okay, so picture effect, don't worry about that. That does a lot of weird stuff, but come over here to number 1. All right, come over here to the number 1, and then we're going to go to processing menu. I think we're on menu number 9. All right, picture profiles, you're going to go ahead and click on that. And now we're going to choose our picture profile. Now remember how I told you you had to turn the display information setting off in the HDMI settings? If you don't, you're going to get all this mess showing up on the screen. But since I'm recording the screen and I want you guys to be able to see this, I turned it back on and now I can see all this stuff on the screen. So let's get into the picture profile 4 settings. We got the black level set to 0. We've got the gamma set to ITU 709. Now, we come over to black gamma. That's set, the range is set to middle, the level is set to 0. You guys can play with that a little bit to try and dial in your colors the way you like them, but that's how I keep mine set. I leave the knee settings as is. I don't really understand what the knee settings are, but I don't mess with those. Color mode. I've got color mode on movie. The color mode on movie looks awesome. Saturation, I leave that set to 0. Color phase, I leave set to 0. Color depth, I don't actually mess with that one. I leave that as is because the colors look really good to me. Detail, now you can add more or less sharpness, all right? A lot of people put this all the way down, but you know, we're not doing any post-processing. So you want to change the detail. If you do a positive, it's going to make the image sharper. If you go into a negative, it's going to make the image softer. So set that to the amount of sharpness that you want, okay? If you go into this menu, all right, let's go to a level. You got, 0 all the way up to +7, all the way down to -7. So of course, the lower the number I would believe would be softer, the higher the number sharper. I actually leave that on 0 because I think the sharpness looks really nice as it is. And that's pretty much it. That's all I do in the picture profile settings right there. Okay. Now, if you want to go up to the top though, the black level, you can change how dark or how light your blacks are. If you think the blacks are too black, all right, you can go ahead and change that. For example, if we go into this, if I go up to plus 13, 14, you'll kind of notice that my hat does not look as black anymore. But if we go down to like a plus 15, you'll notice my hat is crazy black. So that changed the darkness and the lightness of your black colors. That's kind of like your gamma settings for the black. So adjust that till your blacks look the way you want them. That's one thing I would definitely mess with in the picture profile. I think it looks just fine at 0. I could maybe go to like a, I could go to maybe like a plus. If the blacks are a little too dark for you, go to the plus. If they're not quite dark enough, go to the minus settings. But right now, I've just got this one set to 0, and for me, that works really well. So now we got the picture profile set up. Let's go back into the menu and get rid of the on-screen display again. So now let's go ahead and pop out of here. Back into the menu, we're going to go to, whoops, wrong button. We're going to go over here. We're going to go back to the HDMI settings. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the display info, and now the stuff is going to remove from the screen, and you'll only see the picture without all the writing and stuff on the screen. All right, so let's turn that off, and there we go. All the writing and stuff is gone, and this is how it looks, guys. So hopefully this video has been a big help for you guys. Now there is one last thing before we go, which is the manual camera settings. All right, you got your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. So zoom the camera out to the widest view possible. Set the aperture to f1.8. All right, now you're going to go over to your shutter speed. You're going to set that to 1/50. In a general room with good proper lighting, 1/50, f1.8, and then set your ISO up and down until you get the proper exposure. Okay, so my ISO is at 125 right now. The lower the setting, the better, but sometimes you need a little more light. So let's pop it up to 160. There's the ISO at 160. There's 200. There's 250. There's 320. Now you'll notice how that's changing the exposure of the camera as I turn it up. There's the ISO on 1000, and we're all washed out. We're bright. We're overexposed. You don't want that. I find around, around 200, ISO around 250, something like that works really well for me. Just set it to the proper exposure and always leave your aperture at f1.8 when you're completely zoomed out. Now, when you zoom the camera in, it's going to change your aperture. But f/150 for your shutter speed, 1/50. Never touch that when you're using this thing for a webcam. Always leave it at 1/50. Alrighty. I will show you how I have this set up for OBS really quick before we go. Just a couple quick things for it. Okay, so this is how I have it set up on OBS. All right. First off, I go over here to where it says resolution FPS type. I change that to custom. Next, I drop down to where it says resolution. I change that to 1920 by 1080. Now, if you're in the 4K mode, of course, you want to make that 4K, but I find that it lags and stutters and stuff on 4K as a webcam, so I keep it on the 1080. Then I go down to FPS and I use match output FPS, and I put that to auto select 59.94 NTCS. And for some reason, that seems to give me the smoothest movement and stuff like that. No stutter, everything works really great. The rest of the stuff on here, I just leave it as is. Now, if I put a filter on the camera, I do put a color correction filter on there. I have the gamma at +0.4. I have the contrast at -0.02. The brightness I leave alone. The saturation, I do turn it up just a little bit. So I got the saturation on 0.05. Now the hue shift I have on -7.9 because I find that the camera still looks a little bit pink. All right, if I put it on 0, I find that I look slightly pink. So I always go ahead and put that on -7. All right, -7, that makes my skin tones look way more natural. The sharpening filter, you can turn that on if you want to make it look just a little bit sharper. I would rather deal with the sharpening on here instead of change it in the camera itself. All right, in-camera sharpening, never so great, but I would definitely use the sharpening here. All right, so there we have it. That's exactly how you're going to set this up for webcam use and how to make it look very nice and beautiful. Sorry if the video is kind of long, but there's a lot of menus on this camera and a lot of things to go over. So if you set it up just like this, you should get a pretty awesome setup. All right, catch y'all later. See ya.